47 candidates filled the conference room of the Ardent Pharma building, each one carrying a portfolio thicker than the last. Then, the door opened and Caleb Ross walked in. Wrinkled collar, a canvas bag over one shoulder, a 6-year-old girl holding a small stuffed molecule, a soft white dodecahedron she called ISO, pressed against her chest. Someone near the back laughed. A woman in the front row leaned to the person beside her and said something that didn't need to be repeated. Caleb did not look at her. He signed the registration sheet, set his daughter in the chair nearest the door, and walked to the table. He placed his resume face down on the surface. 1 page. The interviewer turned it over. Read it for 4 seconds. Then looked up. "This is it?" Caleb said yes. The interviewer set it down with the particular carefulness of someone who has decided to be polite about something they find insufficient. From the side wall, Nadia Cole, CEO of Ardent Pharma, watched. She had not been scheduled to attend the first screening round. She had come anyway, following an instinct she could not yet name. She looked at the 1-page resume, then at the man who had handed it in. He was smoothing the front of his daughter's jacket with the economy of someone who does not waste motion. 3 lines on that page held everything she had spent 14 months searching for. She just hadn't learned to read it yet. Caleb Ross was 35 years old, and he woke at 5:52 every morning without an alarm. He made oatmeal, packed Mara's lunch in a blue container with a hexagon sticker she had placed there herself and would not permit to be removed, and sat for 11 minutes at the kitchen table before the day began. The apartment was small and clean. One wall held Mara's drawings. A bookshelf held technical journals organized by date. On the highest shelf, behind a stack of notebooks, was a thin gray folder, unmarked. He had not opened it in 2 years. He knew what was in it. Mara was 6. She had her mother's eyes and her father's habit of going still when she was thinking. She carried ISO everywhere, a stuffed molecule Caleb had assembled himself from a craft kit at midnight when she was 3, sewn with careful seams by a man who did not own a sewing machine and had taught himself from a tutorial. She had named it without being asked. She said ISO sounded like a word that meant the same on both sides. Her mother's name had been Sarah. Car accident, 22 months ago, when Mara was 4 and Caleb had been on a research trip in Switzerland. He had been home in 9 hours and out of the laboratory within 60 days. He had not gone back to that work since. Not to the lab, not to the publications, not to the patent office where 3 applications bearing his name had been filed under institutional ownership of a company he no longer worked for. He had made a kind of peace with it, the kind that looks like surrender from the outside and feels entirely different from within. Nadia Cole had taken the CEO position at Ardent 11 months earlier, at 31. She was credentialed, decisive, and operating under pressure she did not discuss in board meetings. 3 of Ardent's most promising compound synthesis patents had expired or been contested in the previous 18 months. The pipeline was thin. 2 acquisition offers had come in at numbers that were adequate and nothing more. Nadia was not interested in adequate. She had assembled a hiring panel to find a senior formulation chemist who could rebuild what had been lost. She sat in on the first screening round because she had a specific instinct and had learned to follow those. The candidates brought binders, printed publication records, laminated credential summaries. One man unrolled a chart of his awards with the enthusiasm of someone expecting applause. Then Caleb Ross set a single page on the table and sat down beside his daughter. The page listed 9 years at a research institution in Ohio. Below that, 3 lines. Formulation Architecture, Membrane-Soluble Compound Series, 2016 through 2019. Synthesis Pathway Development, Controlled Release Delivery Mechanism, 2019 through 2021. Independent Research, 2021 to present. No publications listed, no awards. The interviewer asked where his supporting documentation was. Caleb said the work speaks for itself, or it doesn't. The room had gone slightly quiet. Nadia was no longer looking at the page. She was looking at his hands, flat on the table, still. The way hands rest when someone has been trained to observe rather than perform. She called him to a second interview before the panel had finished reviewing the others. Her assistant, Rachel Kim, flagged this as irregular. Nadia said she was aware of that. The second interview was in her office on the 32nd floor. Clean desk. One monitor. A glass of water. Mara sat beside Caleb with ISO in her lap and a notebook open to a blank page. Nadia asked about membrane-soluble compound architecture. He answered in 2 sentences, both precise. She asked about the controlled release mechanism. He described it in terms so specific that she reached for a notepad. She asked why he had no publications attached to the listed work. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "The publications exist," he said. "They're not attached to my name." Nadia set down her pen. That sentence settled into the room and did not leave. Her internal counsel, Daniel Frey, ran the search 2 days later. He spent a morning cross-referencing patent filing dates, institutional attribution records, and Caleb's employment timeline. By afternoon, he had 3 files open. He called Nadia at 4:17, 3 words before explaining anything. "You need to see this. Patent US-9847231, filed March 2019, institutional assignee Viridian Research Group, Ohio. Lead researcher had departed in November 2021. Patent amended, December 2021, 1 month after departure. The amendment had removed a name from the inventor attribution list and replaced it with a departmental credit notation. Daniel found the original filing draft in an archived submission database. The removed name was Caleb Ross. The second and third patents told the same story. All 3 had been filed and then amended by a man named Gerald Marsh, Deputy Director of Research at Viridian. All 3 original drafts listed Caleb as primary inventor. Combined licensing revenue across 4 years, $41 million. Nadia read the files at her desk at 7:30 in the evening with the building empty. She read them twice. Then she sat looking at the dark window, which gave the room back to her in reflection. She thought about the interview, the compressed technical language, the particular way he had described the membrane architecture, the language of someone who had lived inside the problem for years. She thought about what he had said, and then not said. The publications exist. She had spent 11 months learning to read the difference between people who announced their value and people who simply carried it. She was still learning, but she was beginning to understand the cost of not knowing how. Richard Hale was Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Ardent and had met with Gerald Marsh 3 times in the previous 4 months. The meetings were not in Ardent's calendar system. They were in a private notebook Richard kept in his jacket pocket. When Nadia called him in the morning after reading Daniel's files, he came with the composed expression of a man who had prepared several different responses. She did not give him time to select one. She placed the 3 patent files on the desk and told him what they showed. He said patent attribution in institutional research was a complex area. She said she was aware of that. She also noted that Marsh had placed 3 licensing inquiries with Ardent's acquisitions office in the previous 8 months, and that 2 had been advanced by Richard without standard technical review. He said the inquiries had merit. She told him his access to the acquisitions pipeline was suspended pending a full review. He left without arguing. The door closed with the specific quiet of a man who is already recalculating. Caleb was in the parking garage below his building when Nadia called. He was replacing a brake pad on a neighbor's truck as a favor. Mara, sitting on an overturned crate with ISO, watching. He wiped his hands and answered. Nadia told him about the patent files, the amendment dates, the removed attribution, the $41 million. He did not say anything for a moment. Mara looked up at him from the crate. "I know," he said finally. "I've known for a long time. No anger in it. Just the flat accuracy of a man stating a fact." She asked if he had documentation. He was quiet for 3 seconds. "I kept copies of everything. Not for this reason. I just don't throw away data." She said she needed to meet with him. He said he could come Monday. She said, "I can come to you." The pause that followed had a particular quality she recognized as the quality of someone not accustomed to being met where they were. She drove herself. Walked up 4 flights. The elevator was out. Mara opened the door before she finished knocking. "Are you the lady from the company?" Nadia said she was. Mara opened the door wider. She was at the kitchen table with ISO and a drawing she did not stop working on. Caleb set the gray folder on the table. Original patent drafts, time-stamped lab notebooks, 3 years of email correspondence, departure documentation from Viridian aligned exactly with Daniel's timeline. A printed copy of the amended patent with the removed attribution visible in the revision history. He did not explain the organization of it. It was self-evident. Nadia read through it slowly. When she reached the final document, she set it flat on the table and looked at it. Then she said, "I owe you an apology." He looked at her. "Not for what you know about," she said. "For the interview. I read your resume and spent 40 seconds deciding what it wasn't before I understood what it was." He was quiet. A pause. "You're not the first," he said. The words were not bitter. They were simply accurate. Mara looked up from her drawing. She studied Nadia with the assessment she reserved for things she hadn't finished deciding about. Then she said, "My dad says when something is real, it stays real even if nobody reads it." Nadia looked at the girl for a moment, then back at Caleb. He was examining the table with the focused attention of someone who has decided to study the wood grain very carefully. The legal process took 11 weeks. The original patent drafts established clear inventorship priority. The amendment timestamps set against Caleb's departure date told a story Marsh's attorneys spent considerable effort attempting to reframe and ultimately could not. All 3 patents were formally reattributed to Caleb Ross as primary inventor. The licensing recovery settled in the 9th week. He had asked for one thing. He asked that the institutional record at Viridian be formally corrected, that each amendment be publicly logged as erroneous and reversed, filed with the Patent Office in terms clear enough that anyone who looked would understand what had happened. Daniel said that was the simplest part. It was done in the 3rd week. Richard Hale resigned before the internal review concluded. His letter did not address the substance of anything. At the board review, Nadia stood and said, "This institution failed to conduct the due diligence that would have surfaced what Daniel found in a single morning. A man who built work worth $41 million in licensing revenue repaired brake pads in a parking garage for 2 years because we did not look carefully enough at one page. I am responsible for the culture that made that possible, and I am changing it." The room was quiet in the way rooms become quiet when something true has been said at some cost. Caleb, seated at the far end of the table, gave one small nod. He did not accept the words with warmth or perform forgiveness for the room. He received them the way a person receives something they have waited for long enough that the arrival feels more like relief than triumph. He started at Ardent on a Tuesday in November, arrived at 7:15. Spent the first 40 minutes alone in the laboratory, moving from station to station with his hands occasionally extended, relearning the shape of something familiar. At 8:30, he called Mara at the neighbor's apartment. She answered on the 2nd ring. "Are you in the lab?" "Yes." "Is it a good one?" He looked at the long window, the way the morning light fell across the bench at an angle he had not expected and immediately recognized as useful. "Yes," he said. "It's a good one." She said okay and asked if he'd be home for dinner. He said he'd try. She said that was good enough. The gray folder was no longer on the shelf. He had given it to Daniel in the 9th week and had not asked for it back. The shelf held only journals now and notebooks, and one new item placed there 2 weeks ago without ceremony. A laminated copy of the corrected patent attribution, all 3 pages, his name in the first line, the patent office stamp in the lower corner, confirming the record had been formally restored. He had not shown it to anyone. He had put it there the way a person puts something in a place where it belongs and then goes back to their life. Mara came home from school on a Friday in April and found him already at the kitchen table. She stopped in the doorway. "You're early," she said. "A little," he said. She set her backpack down and sat across from him. She pushed the cereal box toward him without being asked. He poured some. Neither of them said anything for a while. The city moved outside the window in its ordinary way. She turned a page of her book. He ate, and outside the light was going gold across the rooftops, low and even, as though it had all the time it needed.